Hi, I'm Dong Sean. Welcome to Digging into China, where we explore China in depth to review unique perspectives. The U.S.-China trade war has reached a temporary ceasefire. In recent days, heated debates have erupted both domestically and internationally over the extent of tariff reductions by each side. Astonishingly, despite official data released by the U.S. Commerce Committee, disputes persist, an entirely unnecessary squabble. The fact is clear: the U.S. imposes an average tariff of 50% on Chinese goods, yet in China, some falsely claim this figure is only 30% or even as low as 10%. Allow me to clarify the tariff structure. Following the joint statement issued by both nations on May 12th, U.S. tariffs on China are divided into two components. The first includes tariffs imposed after the tariff conflicts escalated on April 2nd, now reduced to 10%. The second encompasses all tariffs in place prior to April 2nd, which remains unchanged. This includes the Section 301 tariffs from the 2018 U.S.-China trade war and the fentanyl-related tariffs added in February and March of this year. President Trump addressed this in a detailed press conference, underscoring that the historical Section 301 and the fentanyl tariffs remain in effect. Additionally, punitive tariffs on specific sectors, automobiles, semiconductors, steel, aluminum, and pharmaceuticals continue to apply. Let me elaborate on the Section 301 tariffs, as they warrant further explanation. Implemented in 2018, these tariffs established varying rates across different industries, covering nearly all Chinese exports to the U.S. initially. The weighted average tariff under Section 301 was approximately 10%. Over time, these tariffs became a cornerstone of the Trump administration's trade strategy against China, with periodic increases. During the Biden administration, President Biden not only retained the Section 301 tariffs, but also raised them once. By the time of Trump's second term, the tariffs ranged from 5% to 25% across industries, averaging about 20% when weighted. This formed the baseline for Chinese exports to the U.S. at the start of 2025. To circumvent this 20% tariff, Chinese exporters have pursued various strategies. Roughly one-third have established factories in Southeast Asia and Latin America, while another third have engaged in questionable transshipment practices. It's worth noting that China once had its own retaliatory tariffs under Section 301, but these were unilaterally cancelled by China after 2020. By Trump's second inauguration, China's baseline tariff on U.S. imports stood at approximately 7%. Thus, the tariff landscape at the beginning of 2025 was 20% from the U.S. and 7% from China. On the surface, China's nominal tariff rate appears low. However, China employs alternative measures such as value-added and consumption taxes, along with stringent product entry and technical certification requirements, to function as non-tariff barriers. These have long posed significant challenges for foreign manufacturers. Following Trump's second inauguration in January 2025, containment measures against China intensified. In February and March, citing widespread fentanyl smuggling, the Trump administration imposed two 10% punitive tariffs on China. These penalties applied across all Chinese export industries, not just specific products, resulting in a cumulative 20% increase. By March, the U.S. tariff rate on China had risen from 20% to 40%. China responded to the fentanyl tariffs with countermeasures targeting U.S. agricultural products, energy, and machinery. However, these measures were never fully enforced. The reason is straightforward. China's strict import qualification system ensures that only large state-owned enterprises such as COFCO for grain or China National Machinery Industry Corporation for precision machinery are authorized to import these goods. These enterprises can secure tariff exemptions by submitting a document under Article 57 of the Customs Law, claiming the products are irreplaceable. Customs authorities rarely scrutinize these claims. The actual impact falls on the small number of private firms importing minor goods with limited overall effect. By late March, China's nominal tariff rate on the U.S. was approximately 15%, a modest 8 percentage point increase from the year's start. Then, on April 2nd, the Liberation Day, the U.S. initiated a global tariff war, imposing reciprocal tariffs worldwide, and China mounted a solitary counteroffensive. Notably, China was the only nation to retaliate. Others, such as the EU and Canada, merely voiced complaints without taking action. During this period, the U.S. escalated its reciprocal tariffs on China to 125%. Added to the prior 40%, resulting in an average tariff rate of 165% after April. In summary, before the tariff agreements on May 12th, the U.S. tariff on China stood at 165%. The negotiations in Switzerland, however, were astonishing. The Chinese delegation made a dramatic concession, proposing a mere 10% tariff on the U.S. and abolishing all other countermeasures, including the rare earth export ban. This effectively nullified all of China's retaliatory measures from this year, including those against the fentanyl tariffs. China essentially accepted the U.S.'s punitive tariffs in full. For the U.S. to reject such a capitulation would have been unwise. The U.S. responded by reducing the 125% reciprocal tariff to 10%, while preserving the 20% Section 301 tariffs and the 20% fentanyl tariffs. This totals 50%, 10% plus 20% plus 20%. I must emphasize that the U.S. also retained punitive tariffs on automobiles, semiconductors, steel, aluminum, and pharmaceuticals, with rates ranging from 50% to 100%. Given China's limited exports in these sectors, their impact on overall average tariff is minimal, raising it by roughly 4 to 5 percentage points. As evidence, Trump signed an executive order on May 12 adjusting the tariff on small parcels from China to 54%, which approximates the current average tariff across all Chinese goods. Also in this order, Trump signed the order again to reduce to 30%. A second critical point is the U.S.'s time condition. China must reach a substantive trade agreement within 90 days from April 2nd by July 1st. Failure to do so will trigger an additional 24% tariff, bringing the total to 78% when added to the current 54%. However, the existing 54% tariff already exceeds the capacity of Chinese exporters, effectively spelling their demise. An additional 24% by July 1st would merely compound an already dire situation. The Geneva negotiations outcome is clear, and opinions on who prevailed will vary by ideology. In my view, Xi Jinping suffered a short-term defeat, but Trump faces a long-term loss. Allow me to explain. From the narrow perspective of trade negotiations, Trump has the upper hand for now. Future U.S.-China talks will likely use current tariff levels as a baseline, meaning China has absorbed the fentanyl tariffs. This aligns with Trump's strategy of applying extreme pressure, then easing slightly to prompt concessions. His deal-making prowess was evident here, giving him a clear win in immediate term. However, the notion that China's forceful retaliation achieved a favorable tariff outcome is unfounded. A popular narrative in China claims the U.S. buckled under trade war pressure, pointing to the first quarter GDP contraction, the first since 2022, as evidence of economic collapse due to tariffs. This reflects a misunderstanding of economics. The U.S. GDP shrank in the first quarter due to a sharp decline in net exports driven by a surge in preemptive imports amid tariff fears. This caused a negative 4.83% drag on GDP from trade. This anomaly does not signal broader economic distress. Other indicators such as the Nasdaq closing at 17,600 points before tariff liberation day support this. Despite a dip on the tariff announcement day, it recovered before negotiations. CPI and employment data further show no signs of U.S. economic weakness. Consider April 2nd. If China had not retaliated, unlike other nations, many would have deemed it timid. Yet, the current outcome mirrors what would have happened without retaliation. China fought only to accept the Tariff Liberation Day terms and re-enter negotiations. The only difference is whether it negotiated directly or fought first. So why do I argue Trump loses in the long term? What is the ultimate aim of his tariffs? Initially, he claimed it was to restore American greatness by repatriating manufacturing. Later, he shifted to forcing China to open its markets and alter its economic model. However, it's now evident that China is not uniquely targeted. Its large trade surplus and the retaliation made it a focal point. But Trump's demands are uniform across nations, using tariffs to extract concessions, not to dismantle the CCP or revive U.S. manufacturing. Returning China to the Tariff Liberation Day negotiation table was always his aim, explaining his willingness to engage. Xi's bold retaliation likely misjudged Trump's intentions. Given prior rhetoric about defeating the CCP, Xi may have believed negotiation was impossible. Yet, post-negotiations, he likely realized that Trump views China similarly to Japan, the EU, or Taiwan, not as an existential threat, but as an opportunity for gains. Xi can afford to concede, as he has navigated Trump's demands before with similar deference. If Trump's goal is not to dismantle the CCP but to secure advantages, he's entered the CCP's domain of deception and evasion. China has a history of flouting international agreements, such as its unfulfilled WTO commitments. If talks proceed, the likely outcome is China promising to purchase U.S. goods for tariff relief, mirroring the last trade war. Indeed, China may find it easier to reach an agreement than the EU or Japan, as the latter consider compliance, while the CCP can agree without intending to follow through. This simplifies deal-making with implementation left uncertain. Xi, recognizing Trump's pursuit of gains, may de-escalate the tariffs to draw him into the CCP's preferred arena, outmaneuvering him. This scenario echoes the previous trade war, where after intense confrontation, China pledged to buy U.S. goods and ease market access. The soybean purchases become a running joke, but China fulfilled only 60% of its commitments, per the Peterson Institute. Promises like lifting foreign ownership caps or granting license to U.S. financial firms went unfulfilled. Trump was thoroughly outplayed. Trump attributed this to Biden's tenure, as the 2020 agreement preceded his exit. Yet the issue isn't Biden. Reducing the U.S.-China trade deficit requires more than an agreement. Curbing China's cheap exports demands coordinated allied action to block transshipment through nations like Vietnam or the EU, forcing economic reform, not a single deal. Similarly, increasing Chinese purchases of U.S. goods isn't achieved by fiat. China's exclusion of firms like Google or Netflix isn't about protecting local companies, but about control. Weak consumer spending stems not from unwillingness but from economic hardship. A deal doesn't magically boost purchasing power. Without the systemic reform, Trump's objectives are unattainable, a point he seems not to grasp. Trump recently noted China's willingness to open markets. This suggests he's being misled again. As in the prior trade war, this time his swift approach may yield a quicker deal, potentially within his term, allowing him to recognize the deception sooner, prompting another trade war. Conversely, Trump's tactics undermine U.S. credibility long-term. Future containment efforts by him or successors will face greater challenges. His aggressive tariffs have eroded America's standing as a democratic leader. While yielding minor gains, this sacrifices America's core asset, its role as a global democratic anchor. Last year, China's economic struggles fueled social unrest and a growing discontent with the CCP. Continued pressure might have sparked upheaval. Instead, Trump's actions have made him a focal point for Chinese nationalism, diverting ire from the CCP. The U.S.'s democratic beacon is dimming. To counter the CCP's strategic acumen honed over millennia, Trump must adopt a wiser approach. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.